Who here has people pleaser syndrome? Most of my life, I think it felt a little bit like no backbone syndrome. You know what I'm talking about, right? Don't rock the boatitis. Anyone else? I know you're out there. I know you are. Are you listening? Let's talk about it. Hi, welcome back to Soulful Wonderings, a space to explore life's lessons, heal through reflection, and remember we're never alone on our journey. I'm Heather and I'm a people pleaser. Wait, and this where you go, hi Heather. Right. So I know there are others out there. I know there are. I know a lot of people in my life that we are the people pleasers of the world, right? And I know here we're getting ready for back to school time. I'm beyond that time in my life, but many of my friends are actually starting to do their shopping. Well, they've done their shopping really for uniforms and supplies, or they might be getting ready to send a child off to college. And of course, it got me thinking. As one does, you kind of start to think back on that time of your life. I was thinking back to my school days, and for me, it might be a touchy subject. I'm not really sure how to classify it. So maybe let's back up for a minute. I was always a creative kid. I was at least always drawing, doodling or drawing something, on a notebook or really just about anywhere I could, I think. And of course, as I got older, I really thought that I wanted to pursue art as a career. And I know that sounds kind of broad, and at the time it was, because I wasn't really sure what art meant. I wanted to learn more. I knew I liked to draw. I knew I liked to be creative. I was also drawn to things like photos, though, and movies, especially movies. So I was a bit torn, between these things, as one often is at that young age. I didn't really know exactly what all this meant, but like I said, I knew I wanted to be creative. I knew that I wanted that to be part of my life. And I think it's safe to say that I liked movies more than some of the rest of it. I was just drawn to animation and to movies, really of many types, many genres. Obsessed feels like a strong word, but it may not be that far off the mark either. I was at a point where I didn't just go watch movies, okay? That's not what this was about. I went to movies. I went to a lot of movies. I rented movies. At the time, you rented a VHS. And I started following Hollywood, if that makes sense. I would read everything I could get my hands on. And back then, back in the day, it wasn't as easy as it is now. We didn't have internet. Internet was coming around later, and it was certainly not like we see today. And I lived in a relatively small town. So even finding magazines and things like that, it wasn't that easy. You went into the local grocery store and they had the teeny bopper stuff. What is it called? Teen Beat, Tiger Beat, all those things. You had that stuff. You had the sensational stuff. Now, of course, if you went to some of the bigger bookstores, they might have something that was a little more serious, because you know how a lot of bookstores, they have magazines that are for a certain topic. But again, we lived in a small town, and you didn't go to town very often. It was kind of a special occasion usually if you went. Now, I remember there was one place locally. It was literally a newsstand. Do those still exist? Maybe in bigger cities they do. But they called it a newsstand, and they sold, that's where you went and got your newspaper. And they had various ones, not just the local one for the town, but of course they had the one, there was a state newspaper. I think that's when we lived in South Arkansas. It was probably Arkansas Gazette, maybe, might have been the name of it. And then, of course, they had the one from Monroe and the different neighboring towns. And I think they often even had bigger ones, like maybe out of Baton Rouge and New Orleans and whatever. So they carried several different things, and then they had all these different magazines. And so I loved to go in there. I loved to see what I would find. And I remember one time finding this magazine called Premiere. And in fact, the first issue I bought was their first issue. It was their premiere issue. And to me, it was quote unquote real movie talk. You know what I mean? It wasn't that gossip or lifestyle like I guess what People and magazines like that. It wasn't like that. It talked about the directors. It talked about the actors. It talked about the different work they did, why they did it, their techniques, different things like that. So it got more into what I'm going to call the workings of the industry. At least it seemed it was to me, because it certainly had a lot more information than just your typical kind of entertainment lifestyle thing. And of course, as I learned more and I understood that there were other publications that were out there that were better, that discussed more. And like I said, as I got older, I heard about a lot of those and knew about a lot of those. You couldn't get those where I lived. That would have had to been a big city, and I don't know, I might could have subscribed to it or something, but I'm not even sure that I would have had the ability to really do that then. So, like I said, this is what I had. So this is what I worked with, right? And when I tell you I devoured it every single word. You know, I was starting to learn who the players were, and I was starting to learn about what they did and why they did it. So it became, like I said, more than just viewing a movie. It was about analyzing it and looking at who the directors were, who the actors were, you know, the score, who did the score, what was it all about. I wanted to know everything, because I think if it were up to me, that's what I would have been doing for a living. I was also into animation. I was starting to learn about college choices at this time. And for me, it came down to I wanted to go to animation school, which was super hard to get into. But again, that kind of fell under that film thing, because that's when Disney was in its heyday. And you even had stuff coming out of the other studios like Warner Brothers and whatnot. And I was fascinated by the animation. Obviously, someone who liked to draw and whatnot. I was absolutely, enamored of what they were doing. And the computer animation that was starting to happen, because that was kind of the beginning of that stuff. And Industrial Light and Magic was doing their thing. And I mean, I kind of, like I said, I couldn't get enough of it. It was just, I was absolutely fascinated by it, and I wanted to understand how they were doing that, and how could I do that, and how could I be a part of that. So I kind of started with animation school, I think, because I had always been kind of a cartoon person, I guess. Bugs Bunny and, Mickey Mouse and whatnot. And so to be an animator was really, that was pretty neat. I felt like it kind of married the two things nicely. The desire to draw and be creative, something I enjoyed, and then, making movies or possibly TV shows or something. So like I said, animation school was really, really one of the top things that I wanted to do. Or I wanted to go to California, and I wanted to try to go to film school. Singing and art were in the mix. I hadn't even talked about singing yet, had I? But I loved to sing. I was always singing something. I was always walking around the house singing something or humming something, or, and of course we sang at church and whatnot. So those things were in the mix of what I might want to do. But the truth is, movies were it. That was really where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And it was the place I could get lost, reading about the stuff or watching a movie and really breaking it down and looking at it and, like, again, like I said, why they had done the things and why they had made these choices, and, even down to the way they lit things and just all of it, again, I don't want to use the word obsessed, but it was absolutely where my head was, and I think maybe it's obvious that something creative was definitely just sort of in my bones, I think, as to what I wanted to do. And I honestly can remember to this day the anxiety that I felt when it was time to have this discussion with my parents. I think we've talked about this some in the episodes where I talked about my mom and then my dad. My parents were just pretty typical of what many in my generation had, right? They were probably a little more conservative in a lot of ways. They were hardworking, middle class folks. You went to church on Sunday. You had meals around the table at night. There were societal things that you followed, and you sort of lived in that lane. That lane of normalcy, maybe. Your kids went to school, got good grades. They probably played a sport or did something. I mean, like I said, where I'm from, it was a smaller town. So sports tended to be the thing, or you might be into art, but we didn't have a whole lot of theater programs and things like that. Maybe in a bigger city, that might have been what you did. But, and everybody was a family unit. You helped out at home. You did your part, you did your chores. You respected your parents, you respected other adults. And then as you grew up, you went to college or a trade school, something along those lines, but you got some kind of education or training. And then, you got a good job, you got married, you had kids, and you continued the cycle. Okay, now hear me. There is nothing wrong with that per se, okay? And I'm not trying to insinuate that there was anything, wrong with my parents feeling that way or wanting that for their kids, okay? I think most of us want positive things. We want good things for our kids. We want them to be successful and to be happy and all those things. But when people live in that lane and that bubble, this sort of middle class, do all the things society says bubble, it's just hard for them to support things that don't conform to the bubble, that don't fit in the lane. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think most mean any malice by that when they don't support it. Like I said, I think they want their kids to be happy, right? They want their kids to be successful. I know I'm like that with my child. I just want him, I never want anything to go wrong. I want him to to have a wonderful life and a perfect life and be loved and all the things, which of course is not realistic. But the point is, that's what a lot of parents think. And I think that's what my parents thought. They just wanted us to be successful. And especially when that's where you are, when that's your mindset, your thought process is, if you go against the grain, they're looking at us as kids going, if you go against the grain and you don't do what is expected of you by the big unknown them, right? But if you don't do those things, then you risk, what do you risk? You risk that society's not going to accept you, that society may treat you poorly. And I think for them, a lot of times, you may also be risking, let's say, less than financial success. You may get by, you may do okay, or you may not. You may really be, not doing well at all financially. But again, I think a lot of what they wanted is that they just wanted you to be happy. And I think in their mind, the way to be happy was to follow those guidelines, that were being set down by society. So when you went against that, they immediately would sort of, stop, hesitate, and be like, wait, no, And, in some ways I can't blame them. That's what they knew. That's what they knew to do. So basically what was happening is I was essentially, I was dropping hints, right? I'm talking about art. I'm talking about schools. And let me tell you, the kibosh was put on California really quick. They were like, no, you are not going to California. And the truth was, so was animation school. That was, I think at the time that was in Florida. I assume it's still there. It was down near Disney. And both of those were immediate, like, no, you're not doing that. That was just too far out of the realm, I guess. So then I said, well, okay, I got to start getting creative here. Let me try to figure out ways that I could still be creative. I could follow a creative path, but still do what they wanted. Maybe still conform, at least to some degree. And maybe you're asking yourself right now, why was that so important? Why was it so important what they thought? Okay. Well, because they were willing to pay for it. Okay. I'm going to be completely honest. Complete transparency there. They were willing to pay for it. And college is a lot. So, plus I was a good girl, right? I did what I was told all my life, especially for my parents, because I wanted them to be happy and I didn't want them to be disappointed in me and all those, all those words, all those things. Now, of course, I did the, kind of defiance thing and I said, fine, I don't need y'all. I'll get a loan or a grant or something. But my dad said that would cause them problems with taxes and such. And I don't want to get into all that, but, to be honest, I didn't completely understand, and I'm not sure he was telling me the truth. But at the time, I believed him, and I didn't want to hurt him, right? I didn't want to cause him issues. They had done so much for me in my life. They just had always taken such good care of us and had been so willing to do for us and to get, try to get us the things we wanted, much less the things we needed. And again, good girl syndrome, right? And they were willing to pay for my education. Like, we'll pay for it. Don't be stupid. We'll pay for it. So the last thing I wanted to do was cause issues. Now, mind you, I wasn't overly happy with the little blackmail trip they were putting on me. But again, good girl, right? You're doing what you're told. For some reason, when I was younger especially, it took me a long time to figure out that you don't always have to do what you're told. Sometimes what you're being told just isn't right. Or you can have more open-minded thinking and really, really figure it out for yourself. And so much of my life then was doing what they thought was right. They were my compass, I guess. They were where I learned most things. So a lot of the things that they would say or do, you kind of took it as, okay, well then that must be true. So again, I wasn't overly happy with the whole, so we're going to call it blackmail situation, but I went along with it. But it didn't stop me from trying to figure it out, right? I started looking at other majors, looking at other schools, still away from home. I really didn't want to be in our back door. I wanted to be able to branch out at least some, and try to do some things on my own. But nothing was working. Nothing was working. I would come to them and it would be no, or I would just get this look, and of course a lot of the places I was looking at were out of state. And for anyone that's done college, it's always cheaper to pay tuition at the state or inside the state where you're a resident. And of course, everywhere I was looking at was out of state because, like I said, I wanted to get away. But I will never forget the day that my mom looked me dead in the face and said, I am not paying out of state tuition. And I am not paying for you to be some starving artist. And if y'all listen to the episode about my mom, that was kind of a big deal for my mom to go there. She was the easygoing, everything was always nice and happy. So for mom to finally get angry, or to really be that forceful, I'm going to say forceful, firm, forceful about something. But anyway, for her to go there, let's just say it was final, and I knew it, because she had a way and she had a tone that when you got there was kind of just no point in arguing anymore. You weren't going to get anywhere. So what did I do? I settled. I found an in-state school that was still kind of away from home, but one that I thought would be fun. No offense to South Louisiana, where I live now, but at the time there were no schools down here that interested me. And some of the other schools in the state, I just, those are just places that I didn't want to go to the same place my sister had gone, and some things like that. So maybe odd reasons for some of the decisions that I made, or some of the boxes that were no's, on my list. But this school kind of checked all those boxes, those no boxes. Well, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. Which is, this probably sounds a really backwards way to pick a school, but and that makes it sound kind of negative, but it wasn't. It was a fun school. It was a good choice. And it wasn't just because of the no's. I actually really did like it. So, but at the end of the day, it was kind of, well, it's not this, it's not that, it's in state, and yeah, it looks pretty fun. So that's kind of how we got there, and that's how I arrived at the school I was going to attend. Oh, and it also helped a little bit that when I was applying for scholarships, I actually got a decent little scholarship from this school. So they seemed to want me. So that was helpful as well. So it is fair to say that I settled on a school, and I also settled on a degree path. It was creative, but it had income potential, right? My degree is actually in advertising design. That's what they called it at the school I went to, versus graphic design. And I worked kind of with my courses and my electives in a way where a lot of things sort of crossed over and whatnot, where when I graduated, I actually had 2 minors as well. So I had a minor in photography and also a minor in broadcast journalism. In fact, had I stayed another year, I think it was around 30 hours. I'm trying to remember, because if I remember right, I would have had to take 2 fairly full loads, like 2 semesters of fairly full loads. But if I had stayed, I would have actually had 3 bachelor's degrees, which, looking back at it, I'm thinking, why didn't you just do that? But then on the other hand, is it really that important to have 3 pieces of paper? And I had gone fall, spring, summer semesters for all 4 years that I was there, no breaks. And quite frankly, I needed one. I was kind of done with school. I was like, you know what? You've done the school thing. It's time to get out into the world. Let's get this done, So I graduated. Now again, hear me. I've had a fun and fulfilling career. Okay. This settling for the career path, it makes it sound like I didn't enjoy it. And that's far from true. The business things that I learned with my family, as I was growing up. And then of course, some of the courses I took in college and different things like that helped me with the abilities that I bring to the table today. I did kind of bounce around jobs a little bit, but I worked in a lot of different industries along the way. I worked in radio, I worked in TV, I've worked at ad agencies. I've just done all of these different things. And I tell people what it added up to was marketing. So I feel like I sort of fell into marketing because of the other things I had been doing. I think it sort of just prepared me for that. because all the things I was doing, when you put them all together, that's often what a marketing person does. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy that it's a lot of different things. I don't do the same thing every day, or rarely do I do the same thing every day. Um, and I have the opportunity to be creative and collaborate with other people and all the things. So it's actually ended up being a really great career for me. I've really enjoyed it. And like I said, I feel like my education and my background and some of those things, it actually allows me to kind of bring things to the table that a lot of other people don't, because they've maybe they've done the college thing, and they've done the marketing job, but they've not had the opportunity to do some of the other jobs that I've had. So like I said, it's been really fun. I mean, I didn't even mention I've been a graphic designer, I've been a photographer, I've done, so like I said, I feel like I've done kind of everything that a marketing professional needs to sort of oversee and work with. So I've actually had a lot of fun and had an opportunity to do a lot of different things. So this is by no means a poor me. Okay, please hear that. But at the end of the day, the reality is that I settled. I took the degree that they would pay for, the degree that I could get quote unquote approval on. And trust me, there are times that I look back and I wonder what my life would have been like if I would have just said fuck it and found my way to go to California. You know, had just found a way to pay. I just packed my car and gone. You know, I know so many people that do that. And I'm in awe of them. I don't want to say I'm jealous, but I kind of am. But what stopped me? Was it fear? Was it, you know, the need to conform? Was it societal expectations? Was it people pleasing? Was it that I needed to please my parents and make sure that they were happy with me and that I didn't burn that bridge and lose that relationship? Because in the end, I am grateful that I stayed, at least for some reasons, because again, had I burned that bridge with my family and I had severed that relationship, or those relationships, even if they had been repaired later or whatever, if I hadn't stayed, I wouldn't have been around when my mom got sick. My mom got sick at the end of my college time. So that was only, 3 years later. You know, who's to say that if I if I'd pissed them off, that we would have been in a good place at that point. But I probably wouldn't have had that time with her. And that even goes to when my sister got sick and my dad got sick. If I was living somewhere like California, it's a big difference. And it's difficult to get on a plane and come to Louisiana every time you need to, or to try to maintain a job and be here. And it, I think it would have looked very different, and I think I probably would have had some regrets with that. Then you go to, would I've met my husband anyway? Would we have crossed paths? And you know, I don't know. Considering, you know, he's from down here as well. I don't know that our paths would have crossed. I don't know that we would have actually met each other. And I truly believe that we're soulmates and we were meant to meet. And of course, what about our son? Would we have our son? Or would I have a child with someone else? You know, there's so many variables there. And I do wonder sometimes how my life and my experiences would have been different had I made a different choice. But here's the thing. This is just one example of the people pleaser thing. Because that's been a thing all my life. As far as I can remember. I mean, there are so many examples that will pop into my head when I think about it. I've always been the bridge, the fixer, to make sure that everyone's getting along and that everything's going to work out in a positive way. I do it with my family. Yeah, I'm a helicopter mom. Come on. I just said it before. I want my son's life to be perfect and him never have to worry about anything, which I know is so ridiculous, because then how's he going to grow and learn? And I do understand that, and I'm not that bad. But as a parent, it's hard It's hard to not to. Um, but I'm the fixer, right? I'm the one that I see things start to fall apart, and I'm like, oh, no, 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 we need to fix it. Because I want everybody to be happy. And that's a little bit different discussion, but a lot of it is about people being happy for me, right? And at work, oh God, don't even get me started. Okay, I'm gonna get started about work. All the bosses that I've had who are quite frankly narcissists, so they have expectations, right? And they come, and I can't tell you how many times I've had to adjust plans or just kind of give in and try to give them what they want so that I can keep the peace, you know? And sometimes it goes against everything I know that we should be doing. Basically, I know they're wrong, but I end up backing up and finding a way, right? I problem solve. I figure out how can I give them what they want, but it still be in a way that's positive for the company so that they can get the result that they want. And like I said, sometimes I kind of regroup, come back with a different approach, or wait for their mood to change so that I can try to get a better answer. But I can't tell you how much of my life is problem solving so that I can give the person what they want, but still make sure they're getting what they need. Does that make sense? You know, when you have a boss that's like, okay, well, I really want to do this. And you're going, yeah, well, and I struggle to say it out loud, but yeah, well, that's not going to work. But you know, for them to be happy, you've got to give them that result that they're looking for. So figuring out how to marry what you know is right and what they want to see is sometimes, let's just say fun. It's really fun to try to figure that out. So when I'm doing that, am I people pleasing or am I fixing? Am I just working the given parameters? Because let's face it, not everyone we deal with in life is going to be easy to deal with. So is it that I'm just looking at my parameters and saying, okay, how do I work inside this? And part of that's keeping me happy, right? Because if the boss is angry, then my life is not fun, right? And I'll say I've gotten better, all right? Over time, I've learned to stand up for myself more. But even then, I often try to do it in a way that's the most peaceful way I can think of, right? Y'all, I hate confrontations so much. Um, I just don't want to deal with it. I don't want all that negativity, and I don't want to have to fight with somebody. Because I'm a crier. Even when I'm mad, I cry. Oh, it's so annoying. But because people think you're upset, like they've hurt your feelings or something, and you're like, no, I'm mad. I just cry when I'm mad. But anyway, I digress. I have gotten better about standing up for myself, but I still am diplomatic. Is that the right word? Like I said, where I try to kind of do it where hopefully I can just kind of work the situation versus having to argue with someone. But like I said, as I've, thought about this and I'm looking back on this, the thing I've noticed is that I do this in virtually every aspect of my life. Every relationship, almost every interaction. And sometimes I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, but it's a reality. And of course, with my personality and being a Pisces and all that, the problem is when it starts to kind of go south, I either just sort of retreat and give up because sometimes my heart is just broken that they don't see me and they don't hear me and they don't get what I really want. I end up living in fear of taking chances because, after all, maybe they're right. Maybe I will be a starving artist instead of being successful. So they sort of get in my head, and again, maybe that's part of my personality. Maybe it's conditioning. Maybe it's a bit of both. And of course, with some of the people that I'm dealing with, I eventually just walk away. I just walk away from them because it feels like a constant conflict and just a constant effort to try and please them so that I don't have to deal with their bullshit. Or, there's the really fun one when I eventually have enough and all of that emotion just comes out in a big old blow up. I've been holding it in. I've been trying to be nice. I've been trying to fix it. I've been trying, and then at some point I just can't anymore and I blow up and I'm mad, and they either think I'm crazy or I'm emotional or both, because of course they do, because it's never them. Again, I digress. So even with all the work I've done over the past few years, I still have so far to go. Sometimes when I look back, I can go, wow, I really have come a long way. And then I look in front of me and go, wow, is there even further to go? But that's okay, because as progress is progress, right? And I'm very much a work in progress. And I feel like this is one of my biggest challenges, these patterns that I've developed, for whatever reason that they're there. And it feels like an absolute Herculean task of kind of figuring out all the ways that they exist and trying to either undo them or figure out how to work with them, or basically just how to live with it and be okay with it, right? It feels like a never ending journey sometimes. Here's the reality. Some of the quote unquote reason is that it's just who I am. It's in my core DNA. And it's a lot to unpack at times, because the truth is it just goes to basic behavior in a lot of ways. And oh my God, how many layers is that, right? It's so many layers, and ones that I'm sure we will be talking about for many episodes to come as we unpack some of that and talk about all these different ways that we are the way we are and how we can work on that. So I hope you'll come back in our next episode where we're going to get into some of these layers. I want to talk about boundaries, about checking in with ourselves, and also about tools that can kind of help us navigate some of these challenges. In the meantime, thank you for joining me on today's episode of Soulful Wonderings. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love if you would share it, and feel free to go on one of our socials and share how you are a people pleaser. Until next time.